Grayson was always a town of quiet routines, until the night the whispers began. A calm, familiar place now felt unsettling, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge. Late one October evening, the wind picked up, and the shadows stretched longer, deeper. Carla, alone in her living room, heard footsteps outside her window, slow, deliberate steps that stopped just as suddenly as they started. The silence that followed was suffocating, and when she peered into the dark, something shifted in the reflection of the glass. A figure, gone in the blink of an eye. Grayson wasn't just hiding secrets, it was waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The small town of Grayson had always seemed like the kind of place where nothing could go wrong. Its streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that could be comforting if you didn't stop to think about it too much. The type of town where the biggest scandal was Mrs. Hammond's missing cat, or the annual bake sale that never quite lived up to expectations. People waved at each other from their porches, exchanged pleasantries at the local diner, and the nights were wrapped in a blanket of tranquility. The stars above were the only things that seemed to remember anything. But something was always off, wasn't it? The kind of off that wasn't immediately obvious, but something you felt in your gut. The locals would tell you stories, half-jokingly, about how Grayson was different from other towns. How there were whispers about things that happened late at night, things people didn't like to talk about, even if they were the kind of things that made your skin crawl. One cold October night, the wind began to pick up, and with it, an uneasy feeling crept over the town. It was the kind of night that carried an unsettling weight in the air, where the quiet was too deep, the shadows too long. As the clock struck midnight, the streets that had once buzzed with laughter and chatter grew eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of an old door or the rustle of leaves skittering across the cracked sidewalks. Inside the small houses, the town's residents found it difficult to shake the feeling that they weren't alone, even though they were. Take Carla, for example. Carla had lived in Grayson all her life. She knew the rhythm of the town better than anyone, knew when the leaves would turn to dust in the fall, when the first frost would creep across the windowsills, and when the last school bell would ring before summer vacation. She had always found comfort in the predictable nature of the place, in its sameness. But tonight, as she sat alone in her living room with only the faint hum of the fridge to keep her company, that same stillness felt wrong. Carla tried to shake the unease that had taken hold of her chest. She flicked on the TV, but the light from the screen only seemed to accentuate the shadows in her room. It wasn't just the darkness outside that made her uneasy, it was the feeling that something had shifted, that something, or someone, had changed the very atmosphere of her home. She glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m., and cursed under her breath. It was always like this in Grayson, wasn't it? Quite sure. But unsettlingly so. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. Carla could have sworn she heard footsteps on the gravel driveway outside her house. Not a car or the usual click-clack of animals rummaging through trash. No, these footsteps were deliberate. Slow. Measured. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned her head to glance toward the window, though she was too afraid to get up and actually look. The thought of peering into the blackness, of seeing nothing but shadows that hid untold horrors, was too much for her to handle. She sat still, her breath shallow, her pulse thudding in her ears. The footsteps continued. Then they stopped. A chill ran down her spine. Carla strained her ears, but there was nothing. Silence. The oppressive kind. The kind that made her feel like she was suffocating. Then, almost imperceptibly, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She wasn't sure why, but she felt watched. And that wasn't the kind of thing you could ignore in a town like Grayson. Not when the air itself seemed thick with hidden secrets and things that went bump in the night. A faint tapping on the window broke her from her thoughts. She froze. Could it be a bird? No, it was rhythmic. Someone, or something, was outside, knocking. Slowly. Methodically. She stood, her legs shaky as she approached the window. Her breath caught in her throat as she peered into the dark night. The street lamp across the road flickered ominously, but no figure stood beneath it. No one walked down the street. There was nothing to see but the swaying trees, their branches creaking in the wind. It was too still, too quiet, Carla stepped back from the window, her pulse quickening. She was imagining things, she told herself. There was no one out there. Just her nerves getting the best of her. The wind was playing tricks on her mind. She turned to go back to the couch when something caught her eye, a movement in the reflection of the glass. A figure. For a split second, she thought she saw someone standing in the yard, their silhouette faintly illuminated by the weak light of the street lamp. But when she blinked, they were gone. No one was there. Her breath caught again, and she slowly turned around, eyes wide, heart racing. She thought of the stories she'd heard, of the whispered tales about things happening in the dark corners of Grayson, of things that shouldn't be there. She dismissed them as old wives' tales, the kind of things bored small-town folk told each other to pass the time. But now, standing in her living room with the window behind her and the air so thick with tension it almost felt like it could suffocate her, Carla wasn't so sure anymore. She grabbed her phone, dialed the first number that came to mind, her neighbor, Mr. Jensen. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, on the 4th ring, something strange happened. The line clicked, and an unsettling voice, low and grating, answered. "Carla," it whispered, "they're coming." The phone went dead. Her hand trembled as she pulled the phone away from her ear, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what to think, whether she had imagined it, or if something truly sinister was happening. But there was one thing she knew for certain now: Grayson wasn't the quiet, peaceful town she had always believed it to be. It was hiding something. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting. For her. For all of them. She could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating, just beyond the edge of her vision. Something was coming, and it wasn't the wind. It was something darker, something old, something that had never truly left. The only question was, would she ever find out what it was before it found her? Outside, the wind picked up again, louder now, rattling the window pane like a warning. As Carla stood frozen in place, she realized something she had always refused to believe. Something was wrong with Grayson. Something was wrong with the quiet. And in the deepest part of her gut, she knew the town was waiting. Waiting for her to discover what had been buried long ago. And she wasn't sure if she could outrun it. But she would have to try. Because Grayson wasn't just a small town. It was a place where secrets slept, and where nightmares came alive. It wasn't long after the disappearance of Sarah Adams that the town of Grayson started to change. The peaceful veil that had once covered it was starting to tear at the seams, and with each passing day, the whispers grew louder. The town's residents had always lived with a certain tranquility, with their quiet routines marking the rhythm of their days. But now, the shadows felt heavier, more persistent. There was something deeply unsettling about Sarah's disappearance, something that couldn't simply be explained away. Sarah had been a bright, spirited girl, everyone's favorite. She'd been best friends with Lily Palmer since childhood, and the two of them had spent countless hours walking the winding streets of Grayson, dreaming about the future. They'd share everything with each other, every hope, every fear. Nothing was too big, too small, or too strange to keep from one another. Or so Lily thought. The day Sarah vanished was a day like any other. It had been a bright, clear morning when she left her house to meet Lily. They had planned to go to the old carnival grounds just outside of town, the place where they had spent so many summer afternoons, climbing on rusted rides and daring each other to run through the overgrown fields. It was a place that had always felt like their secret, a place where nothing bad could ever happen. But Sarah never showed up. Lily had waited for hours, hoping Sarah would appear, but she never did. It wasn't until evening fell and the town's lights flickered on that Lily started to worry. She called Sarah's phone, but there was no answer. She knocked on her best friend's door, only to be met with an eerie silence. That was when the panic started to settle in, and with it, the realization that something was terribly wrong. The authorities were called, and the search began, but nothing was found. No sign of Sarah. No evidence of foul play. She had simply vanished into thin air. As the days stretched into weeks, and then into months, the town started to move on. People tried to pretend that life was still normal. But Lily couldn't. She couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had left them with more than just her absence. There was something left behind. a presence that lingered in the air like the last trace of perfume. The whispers began shortly after Sarah's disappearance. At first, it was just the odd comment here and there, a muttered remark or a glance exchanged when people thought no one was listening. She wasn't the first, some would say. This town has a way of swallowing people whole. Lily heard them, of course. They were hard to ignore, especially when they came from people who had once been her friends. They spoke in hushed tones as if they thought Lily couldn't hear them. But she could. And every time she did, it felt like another piece of the town that she loved, the town she had grown up in, was slipping away. Don't go into the woods after dark, one neighbor warned. You never know who or what is watching you. Lily had laughed it off the first time she heard it, dismissing it as some kind of superstition. But the second time, she wasn't so sure. The town had always had an odd reputation. Strange things had always happened here, but they were never talked about openly. People had their secrets. Sometimes, they were small things, odd occurrences that were quickly explained away. A broken fence, a weird noise in the middle of the night, an old woman talking to herself in the street. But now, with Sarah gone, all the little oddities seemed to gain weight. They didn't just feel like coincidences anymore. They felt like warnings. As the months wore on, Lily couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion in her gut. The way the town seemed to shift, how the people she once trusted began to act differently, more distant, more guarded. It was as if they were all afraid of something they couldn't, or wouldn't, talk about. Every conversation she had felt like it was being steered away from certain topics, from certain places. There were too many half-finished sentences, too many nervous glances. But Lily couldn't stop herself. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had happened to her best friend, the girl who had vanished without a trace. So, one evening, she found herself standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the thick, dark trees. The very woods that had always seemed so innocent, so familiar, now felt like something else entirely. Something sinister. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the wind whispered through the branches like a warning. Lily had heard the stories, of course, the rumors that the woods were cursed, that strange things had happened there in the past. She had always dismissed them as local folklore. But now, with Sarah's disappearance haunting her every thought, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched. She took a step forward, then another, and before she knew it, she was deep into the woods, the shadows swallowing her whole. The trees towered above her like silent sentinels, their branches creaking in the wind. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, the fear tightening in her chest as the silence around her deepened. Every crackling leaf underfoot seemed louder than the last. Every rustle in the distance made her jump. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, she wasn't even sure she believed in the stories. But something inside her had shifted. She needed to know the truth. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. It wasn't long before she realized she was lost. The path she had followed was gone, and she could no longer see the faint glow of the streetlights in the distance. Panic surged through her. She called out for help, but her voice was swallowed by the trees. She tried to turn around and retrace her steps, but every direction looked the same. The woods seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees closing in around her like a maze she couldn't escape. Her breath was shallow, and her hands were trembling. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. And then, just as she was about to give in to the crushing fear in her chest, she saw it. A faint glow in the distance. At first, she thought it was a trick of her imagination, but as she moved toward it, the light grew brighter. It was coming from a small clearing up ahead, where the trees parted to reveal an old, weathered house. It wasn't a house anyone in Grayson talked about, at least, not in public. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had heard whispers about this place, about the old farmhouse at the edge of the woods. Some said it had been abandoned for years, but others claimed it was never truly empty. No one ever went near it. No one ever spoke of it. And yet, here it was, standing before her, bathed in an eerie glow. She approached cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. As she drew closer, the door creaked open as if on its own. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a cold sweat trickled down her spine. She wanted to turn around, to run back to the safety of the town, but something compelled her to keep moving forward. The moment she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. It was then that Lily realized she had made a terrible mistake. The house was not abandoned. And she was not alone. Eric had always prided himself on being a man of logic, a historian who saw the world through the lens of facts, dates, and records. He had never been one to entertain rumors, superstitions, or strange occurrences. Grayson was a small town, and small towns had their quirks. They had old legends, twisted stories passed down through generations, but Eric was always quick to dismiss them. He believed in the power of reason, in the hard truth of documents and archives. The supernatural didn't belong in his world, and he liked it that way. But all of that changed the night he started receiving the phone calls. It had begun simply enough. The phone rang one evening while Eric sat in his study, poring over old town records from the late 1800s. The steady hum of the fluorescent light above him was the only sound in the room. The calls were odd at first, strange, unrecognized numbers flashing on the screen, with no voicemail left afterward. At first, Eric had brushed them off as wrong numbers or telemarketers. He didn't pay much attention to the first few. But when the calls began to repeat themselves, same number, same time every night, he couldn't ignore them any longer. Something about it gnawed at him, a creeping sensation at the back of his mind that told him there was something more to these calls than mere coincidence. One evening, after the fifth call in as many nights, Eric decided to pick up. The clock on the wall showed 12:03 a.m. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the whisper of wind outside. He felt the familiar chill of the air, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was late, too late for anyone in town to be calling. He grabbed the phone from the desk, hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello." His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to mask it with a calm tone. At first, there was nothing on the other end but silence, thick and oppressive. He held the phone to his ear, waiting. The seconds felt like minutes, and his mind began to wander. Maybe this was just another prank call. Maybe the silence was nothing more than some twisted joke. Then, a whisper, so faint that it barely registered in the stillness of the room, drifted through the receiver. "Eric." The voice sent a shock through his system. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wondered if it was some sort of mistake, a misdialed number or a glitch in the system. But there was something in the way the voice spoke his name, so deliberate, so haunting, that made him freeze in place. He recognized that voice. It was Sarah's voice. His throat went dry. He had known Sarah Adams, the girl who had disappeared months ago. She had been a bright soul in the town, a quiet but friendly presence who had always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. But she was gone. She had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions and heartache. "Sarah?" Eric's voice was almost a whisper as he leaned closer to the phone, his pulse racing. "Is that you?" The line went dead. Eric stared at the phone in his hand, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had never been one to believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything of the sort. But that voice, the cold, soft whisper of Sarah's name, it was undeniable. His logical mind wanted to dismiss it as some sort of trick, a malfunction in the phone line, but deep down, he knew better. This was something more than that. Something far more sinister. The next night, the call came again. Same time, same number. This time, Eric was prepared. He sat in the darkness of his study, eyes fixed on the phone, waiting for it to ring. And ring it did. "Eric." The voice came again, softer this time, more urgent. His heart began to race. "What do you want? Why are you calling me?" He demanded, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He had never felt so powerless, so vulnerable. The voice paused for a moment, the silence dragging on, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. "I didn't leave," the voice said finally, low and distorted. "I'm still here." Eric could feel the sweat begin to bead on his forehead. His hands gripped the phone tightly, knuckles turning white. "Where are you? Where have you been? What's happening?" He couldn't stop himself from asking. It was as if the answers were just out of reach, like they were teetering on the edge of his understanding, waiting for him to grasp them. The voice on the other end didn't answer him directly. Instead, it whispered something that made his blood run cold. The past is buried here. The truth is hidden under the ground. The line went silent once again, the static on the other end filling the void. Eric slammed the phone down, his heart pounding in his chest. The room felt suffocating, and for the first time in his life, Eric didn't know what to do. He was a historian. He knew how to follow facts, to dig into the past and uncover truths hidden beneath layers of time. But what Sarah was telling him, if it was really Sarah, was something entirely different. It wasn't history. It was something far darker, far more dangerous. That night, Eric couldn't sleep. His mind raced with questions, each one leading to another, but none of them offering answers. What had Sarah meant? What was buried? And why was she trying to contact him, of all people? The calls continued, each one more disturbing than the last. Each night, the voice grew more desperate, more pleading. It spoke of things that only Sarah could have known, secrets from her childhood, memories from times when they had spent hours talking in her room, sharing their dreams, their fears. It was as if Sarah was trying to tell him something important. But every time he tried to ask the right questions, the calls would end, leaving him in the dark, with nothing but more questions. It wasn't long before Eric realized that these calls weren't just about Sarah. They were about something else entirely. Something that connected the town of Grayson to a past that had been carefully buried. He began to dig into the town's archives, pulling out records and journals from long before Sarah had been born. It didn't take long before he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the town's oldest records, Eric found a collection of documents dating back to the 1800s. They were written in a language he didn't recognize, but it wasn't the language that chilled him, it was the content. The documents spoke of a pact, a deal made between the town's founders and a mysterious figure. The pact promised prosperity and safety for the town in exchange for something darker, something that involved the sacrifice of its people. As Eric read the documents, his mind began to piece together the horrifying truth. The town of Grayson hadn't just been built on hard work and community. It had been built on something far darker. A pact that had been renewed over the years, hidden beneath layers of lies and deception. And now, Sarah's disappearance, along with the strange phone calls, was the latest chapter in a long and terrifying history. But who had made the calls? Was it really Sarah? Or was it something else, something that had been lurking in the shadows of Grayson for centuries? The more Eric uncovered, the more he realized that Sarah's disappearance was just the beginning. There was something buried deep beneath the town, something that had been waiting for the right moment to resurface. And now, that moment had arrived. The calls were not just a cry for help. They were a warning. And Eric was the one who had been chosen to uncover the truth. The days that followed Eric's discovery of the ancient records were filled with a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. The truth, once buried in the dusty old archives of Grayson, had unearthed something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. The pact made by the town's founders was not just some relic of history, it was the foundation upon which the town's prosperity had been built. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Eric's mind raced with questions. What was the price of this prosperity? And, more importantly, what had happened to Sarah Adams? The voice on the other end of the phone had made it clear. The past was buried here. The truth was hidden under the ground. But what truth? And why had Sarah, of all people, been the one to contact him? Determined to uncover more, Eric began his investigation in earnest. He returned to the old church in the heart of Grayson, a place that had always felt heavy with history. The church was built in the 1800s, the same time the pact had been made. Eric had always felt a strange unease when he walked through the creaking doors, as if the very walls of the building held secrets that no one was willing to reveal. Now, with the weight of what he had learned pressing on his shoulders, the church felt more like a tomb than a place of worship. He had visited it many times before, but this time, he wasn't there to pray. He was there to dig for answers. The church's archives were tucked away in a small, forgotten room at the back of the building. Most people in town had long forgotten about it, but Eric knew it held the key to understanding the past. As he sifted through the brittle pages of old ledgers and dusty scrolls, One name kept cropping up: Elias Thornton. Thornton was one of the town's founders, a man whose name was etched into the town's history as a pillar of its prosperity. But as Eric dug deeper into his life, he began to uncover a disturbing pattern. Thornton had been involved in the construction of the original church, and according to the old records, he had played a pivotal role in the pact that had been made with the mysterious figure from the woods. Eric's stomach churned as he read more. The document spoke of sacrifices, blood offerings that were made to ensure the town's survival. The founders had bargained with something in the forest, something that demanded payment in exchange for the safety and prosperity of Grayson. At first, the sacrifices had been small: livestock, crops, even the occasional stranger passing through. But as time went on, the sacrifices grew more personal. Children, young girls like Sarah Adams, were taken, disappeared. Their names lost to history, their stories erased from the town's collective memory. Eric's heart pounded as he realized the terrifying truth: Sarah's disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger pattern. The town's prosperity had always come at a cost, and Sarah had paid that price. But why now? Why, after all these years, had she been chosen? What had triggered the return of the pact, the return of the darkness that had been lurking just beneath the surface of Grayson? He couldn't stop thinking about the phone calls. The voice of Sarah had been so clear, so desperate. But it wasn't just Sarah's voice that haunted him, it was the way she had spoken. "The past is buried here," she had whispered. "The truth is hidden under the ground." Was the ground beneath Grayson hiding something? Something that had been sealed away for generations? Eric didn't know, but he was determined to find out. The church's basement, which had once been used to store old records and relics, was now locked away behind a rusted metal door. It had been sealed off for years, but Eric couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something important lay hidden within. He managed to track down the key, a rusty old thing that had been left forgotten in a drawer in the church office. As he turned the key in the lock, a wave of cold air rushed out from behind the door, and the faint smell of mildew and decay filled his nostrils. The basement was a dark, cavernous space, filled with old wooden crates and rotting furniture. But at the far end of the room, something caught his eye: a stone altar, partially obscured by the shadows. Eric's breath caught in his throat as he approached the altar. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The stone was smooth, worn with age, and covered in a thick layer of dust. But what disturbed him the most were the symbols carved into the surface. They were unfamiliar, twisted shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. As his fingers brushed the surface of the altar, a low hum vibrated through his bones. His heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. There was no mistaking it. This altar had been used for something far darker than mere worship. It had been used for sacrifices. Suddenly, a thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. What if the altar was the source of the town's prosperity? What if it was the price that had been paid all these years, the blood of the innocent, used to fuel the town's success? Eric felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he realized the depth of the town's corruption. Grayson had been built on blood, and now, it seemed, the cycle was about to begin again. As Eric continued to examine the altar, he noticed something even more chilling. There were fresh markings on the stone. The symbols, which had once been worn smooth with time, had been recently etched into the surface. The marks were still sharp, still new. Someone had used the altar recently, and that meant that the sacrifices hadn't stopped. They had only been dormant for a time. The realization hit Eric like a punch to the gut. The pact was still in effect. Whoever had made the recent markings had done so with purpose. The town was still part of the pact. And Sarah's disappearance wasn't the first, nor would it be the last. In that moment, Eric knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't let Grayson continue to live in ignorance, to continue feeding the darkness that had haunted it for centuries. He had to stop the sacrifices. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed to find someone who could help him. Someone who had lived in the town long enough to know its secrets. But as Eric turned to leave the basement, he heard something, a soft, echoing whisper. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then the voice became clearer, more distinct. It was a voice he recognized. "Eric." It whispered, "You're too late. His heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable. It was Sarah's. But she wasn't warning him. No, she was something else. Something older, something darker. The past was waking up, and there was no going back. The truth, buried beneath Grayson's foundations, was about to surface, and Eric was right in the middle of it. Eric stood frozen in the dimly lit basement, the eerie whisper of Sarah's voice still ringing in his ears. "You're too late." The words reverberated in his chest like a cold, unsettling echo, making his heart beat faster, his breath come in shallow gasps. He looked around, eyes darting from one shadowy corner to another, expecting to see something, or someone, emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the silence of the long-abandoned church basement, the scent of decay lingering in the air. And yet, that voice, that whisper, persisted in his mind, gnawing at him like a persistent gnawing hunger. He didn't know if he had heard it for real or if it was some kind of trick his mind was playing on him, but he knew one thing: something was terribly wrong. Sarah's voice was a ghost, an echo from the past, but it felt as if it were reaching out, trying to warn him, to keep him from uncovering the truth. But what? Why would Sarah, whose life had been snatched away by whatever dark force lingered over Grayson, want to stop him now? His mind raced as he backed away from the altar, his eyes glued to the markings that had been carved into the stone. The symbols, old and fresh at the same time, seemed to shimmer in the low light, their meaning unclear yet powerful. He couldn't shake the feeling that the altar was at the center of everything, at the center of the town's prosperity, at the center of the darkness that had claimed Sarah and countless others before her. The townspeople had been too afraid to confront the truth, too afraid to question the pact that had been made all those years ago. But Eric wasn't afraid. Or at least, he didn't think he was. His fingers brushed against the cold stone of the altar, the hum from before vibrating under his skin once more. It was as if the altar were alive, as if it had a pulse of its own. He had to stop this. He had to find a way to break the cycle. But how could he when the very foundation of Grayson seemed to rest on this evil pact? Was it even possible to undo what had been done so long ago? Was the town doomed to repeat the same horrors for eternity? Eric's mind raced, and he felt a rising sense of panic, but then a thought pierced through the fog of fear. Sarah had contacted him. She had reached out, desperate for him to understand what had happened to her, to uncover the dark secret that had been buried for so long. She hadn't been warning him to stop. She had been trying to guide him, to tell him that he was the one who could stop it. But why him? Why had the voice come to him? He wasn't anyone special, just a historian, a man who had never believed in the supernatural, who had spent his life studying facts and records. He wasn't supposed to be involved in something like this. Still, here he was. He turned, making his way to the stairs that led back up to the main church. His body felt heavy, weighed down by the knowledge he had uncovered. It was hard to breathe, as if the very air in Grayson had turned foul. He needed help, he knew that much. But who could he trust? Who in this town would believe him, let alone join him in trying to unravel the mystery of the pact, the altar, and the dark force that had plagued Grayson for generations? As he emerged from the basement, the air above ground felt no less oppressive, but at least it wasn't suffocating. The church, which had once been a place of comfort and solace, now felt more like a prison. The stained glass windows, depicting scenes of salvation and hope, felt like mockeries of everything that had been hidden beneath the town's peaceful exterior. The town's history, its prosperity, its very existence, had it all been built on a lie? Eric stepped out into the night, the cool wind biting at his face as he made his way down the cobblestone path that led to the main road. Grayson was still the same quiet town, the same streets lined with old houses and shop fronts, the same air of sleepy, small-town serenity. But the peace was no longer comforting. It was unsettling. He had learned too much. As he walked, the weight of the town's secret seemed to press in on him from every side. He could feel the eyes of the town watching him, even though no one was out on the streets. Everyone knew that Grayson was hiding something, but what if they didn't realize just how deep it went? What if the very town they loved, the very community they had built, was cursed to forever serve the darkness that had been bargained for so long ago? It was impossible to shake the feeling that the town itself was alive, breathing in the dark secrets it had hidden so carefully. Every corner of Grayson seemed to hold a part of the truth, buried just beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to uncover it. As he walked toward the town square, Eric's mind drifted to Lily Palmer, Sarah's best friend. She had always been close to Sarah, and even now, months after Sarah's disappearance, Lily hadn't given up on finding her. She'd been asking questions, digging into the past, trying to make sense of the things that had been happening in the town. But could Lily help him? Could she handle the truth? Eric wasn't sure. Lily had always been the brave one, the one willing to confront the unknown head-on, but was she prepared to face the reality of what Grayson had become? When Eric finally reached Lily's house, he didn't waste any time. He knew she had to know the truth. He had to tell her what he had uncovered. If anyone could help him piece it all together, it was her. The door opened before he even had a chance to knock. Lily stood there, her expression weary but determined. She had clearly been waiting for him, as if she had known he was coming. "Eric," she said quietly, her voice carrying a mix of relief and apprehension. "I've been expecting you." Eric stared at her, surprised. How could she have known? Had she somehow felt it too? "You know, don't you?" he asked, his voice thick with the weight of everything he had uncovered. Lily nodded, her eyes dark with something that Eric couldn't quite place. "I've known for a while. Sarah came to me. She told me what's been happening. What happened to her?" Eric's heart skipped a beat. "She came to you?" Lily's eyes were heavy with sorrow as she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "She's been trying to warn me. To warn all of us. But I didn't understand, not until now." Eric felt a chill run through him. Sarah had reached out to Lily as well? Was this some kind of final plea for help, a desperate attempt to stop what was inevitable? Or was it something darker, something more malevolent? Lily stepped aside, motioning for Eric to come in. "Come on, I think we have a lot to talk about." As Eric entered, the feeling of unease in his chest deepened. This was it, the moment when everything would change. The truth was out in the open now, and there was no turning back. Grayson's past was alive again, and the darkness that had once been buried in the town's history was rising to the surface, ready to claim its next victim. And they were all caught in the middle of it. Lily closed the door behind him, locking it with a decisive click. The weight of the town's secrets pressed down on them both, but now, at least, they were no longer alone. Together, they would face whatever was lurking in the shadows of Grayson. And whatever came next, they would face it head-on. The room felt stifling as Eric sat across from Lily, the dim light from a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The heavy silence between them spoke louder than words. Neither of them had to say it, but they both knew the truth now. Grayson's dark past wasn't just something hidden in old records or whispered about behind closed doors. It was real, and it was coming for them. Lily's eyes were distant, clouded with the weight of everything she had learned, but there was also a quiet determination in them. She had been carrying this burden for months, ever since Sarah disappeared, and now it seemed like the weight was finally too much to bear alone. Sarah had reached out to both of them in different ways, but with the same warning. Something was stirring in the town, something old, something powerful. Eric didn't know how to begin. He felt like he had crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. What had started as a simple curiosity about the town's history had spiraled into something far darker and far more dangerous. The ancient pact, the altar, the strange disappearances, it was all part of something far bigger than either of them could have ever imagined. And now, with Lily sitting across from him, looking more like someone who had seen the world collapse around her, Eric realized that they couldn't stop this alone. They needed to understand the origins of this curse, or whatever it was, if they were to have any hope of breaking it. "I don't know how to explain this," Eric began, his voice low. "But everything I've found, it all leads back to one thing: the altar, the pact, and the people who made it." Lily nodded slowly, her lips pressed tightly together as though trying to hold back tears. She hadn't spoken much about Sarah's disappearance, not to anyone but Eric. It was as if she had already known deep down that the truth would be too much for anyone to handle. "I know," she said quietly. "I've seen it. In my dreams. And she stopped herself, a shudder running through her as though just speaking the words brought the darkness closer. "I never believed in things like that. Not really. But after Sarah, after everything, Eric leaned forward, his mind racing. What have you seen? What do you know? Lily swallowed hard, as if the memories were difficult to bring to the surface. It's like I can't escape it. It's everywhere. At night I hear it, the wind howling, like it's calling me. And I see Sarah, but not like she was. It's her, but it's not her. It's like a shadow of her, something wrong. She paused, her voice faltering. She's telling me to leave, to run before it's too late. But then she says I can't escape it. That no one can. The words hit Eric like a punch to the gut. He had heard Sarah's voice, the same haunting whisper, calling him by name, telling him he was too late. What is it, Lily? He asked, his voice tight with urgency. What is coming? Lily's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw real fear in them. She had always been the strong one, the one who held the town together when people began to whisper about things they didn't understand. But now, that strength was fading. I think it's already here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever it is, it's waking up. The town has always been cursed, Eric. The pact, it never truly ended. It just went dormant for a while. But now it's hungry again. The weight of her words settled heavily between them. The town had always been plagued by strange disappearances, unsettling events, and whispers of things in the dark, but Lily's words made it clear. Whatever had been waiting in the shadows for so long was no longer content to stay hidden. It was growing stronger, and it wanted something. Or someone. Eric ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. Everything he had discovered, the records, the altar, the strange symbols, pointed to the same thing. The pact was alive. And the altar wasn't just a place of worship, it was a site of sacrifice. It had been used to feed something dark, something ancient, and the price for the town's prosperity had always been human lives. Now that price was coming due. It's not just about Sarah, Eric muttered, almost to himself. It's about everything, about the town, about the past. Lily's eyes were wide, fear and realization dawning on her face. It's all connected. The altar, the disappearances, the sacrifices, they're all part of it. They have to be. Eric nodded slowly, his mind racing to piece it all together. But why now? Why after all these years has it come back? He was trying to make sense of the timeline. The pact had been made centuries ago, but for decades, it seemed like Grayson had been left in peace. No more sacrifices. No more mysterious disappearances. The town had prospered. But now, something had awakened it again. Something had triggered the pact's resurgence. Lily leaned back in her chair, her face pale. It's because of Sarah. I'm sure of it. She was meant to be the next sacrifice, but she didn't go willingly. She fought back, Eric. I saw it in my dreams. She tried to stop it and she failed. Then why didn't it just take her? Eric asked, his voice cracking with frustration. Why leave her for so long? Lily shook her head, her eyes dark with a mixture of grief and fear. I think it's testing us. It's testing me, testing you. It wants us to be the ones to stop it, but we're not strong enough, Eric. No one can stop it. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and for a moment, Eric could see the doubt and hopelessness that had been creeping into her soul. Don't say that, Eric said sharply. We don't know that for sure. We don't know how deep this thing goes yet. But we can't give up now. If Sarah reached out to both of us, if she's still trying to warn us, then we have to do something. We can't just let it win. Lily met his gaze, her face filled with uncertainty but also a flicker of the same determination that had brought her to this point. You're right, she said, her voice firming. We can't give up. But what do? We don't even know what this thing is, or how to fight it. Eric stood up, pacing the small room. We need to learn everything we can about the pact. We need to find out what made it so powerful, what the altar represents, and why the town's founders made the deal in the first place. If we can uncover that, we might find a way to stop it. But we have to act fast. The longer we wait, the stronger it gets. Lily nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll do it together. We'll find the answers, Eric. We have to. Eric looked at her, seeing the same fear in her eyes that had settled in his own heart, but there was also something else. Hope, no matter how faint. They didn't have much time, and they didn't have all the answers, but together, they had a chance. A slim chance, but it was all they had. The air in the room grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, pressing in from all sides. Eric knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The darkness wasn't just waiting for them to come to it, it was drawing closer, creeping through the cracks of Grayson, just like it had in the past. And if they didn't act now, they might not be able to stop it at all. "We'll start with the town archives," Eric said, his voice resolute. "There has to be something we missed, something that tells us more about the founders, about the ritual, about the pact." Lily nodded. "Let's go then. Before it's too late." With one last look at each other, they gathered their things and stepped out into the night, the cold wind biting at their skin. Grayson was quiet, but Eric knew that silence wouldn't last for long. The truth was coming, and they needed to be ready for whatever it would reveal. Whatever it would demand. The town archives were nestled in the heart of Grayson's most historic building, a decrepit structure that had once been the pride of the town but now stood like a shadow of its former self. The large, cobbled facade had long since lost its grandeur, with ivy creeping up the walls and the windows covered in a layer of grime. The building's very presence felt like an ancient relic, a place where time had slowed to a crawl, much like the town itself. As Eric and Lily stood before it, the weight of the town's history pressed heavily on them. Everything had led them here, to this moment, to these crumbling records that could hold the key to understanding the dark forces lurking beneath Grayson's surface. Eric pushed open the large oak door, the hinges creaking loudly in the still night air. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of aged paper and dust, the kind of scent that belonged to forgotten things. The flickering light of a single overhead bulb cast long shadows across rows of old bookshelves and filing cabinets, their contents long since relegated to oblivion. The space felt suffocating, as if it were trying to keep its secrets hidden in the darkness, refusing to reveal what it had witnessed over the years. Eric shivered, but it wasn't the cold that made him uneasy, it was the overwhelming sense of history, of something far older than him, something that had been waiting patiently in the dark for this very moment. Lily walked beside him, her steps echoing off the walls as she glanced around the room, her expression serious. "This place is like a tomb," she whispered, her voice hushed as though speaking too loudly might disturb the ancient air. "Do you think we'll find anything here?" "I don't know," Eric replied, his gaze scanning the dusty shelves. "But if there's any information about the pact, about what happened to Sarah and the others, it has to be here. This town has hidden its secrets for too long. The records have to tell us something." They made their way to the far corner of the room, where a large, rusted filing cabinet stood. Its drawers were heavy with the weight of years, their metal surfaces scratched and scarred, but to Eric, it looked like the key to everything. He pulled open the first drawer, the metal groaning as it slid out of its track, and began rifling through the stacks of yellowed papers inside. Each sheet was a relic of the past, each page an artifact of a time long gone. His fingers brushed over the fragile documents, hoping for something, anything, that would make sense of the nightmare they were living in. Lily stood beside him, her eyes darting between the papers and the dark corners of the room, as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. "I don't like this, Eric," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "The more we dig into this, the more it feels like we're digging our own graves." Eric didn't answer immediately. He understood what she meant. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. They weren't just uncovering history, they were unearthing something that had been buried for a reason. The town had buried its past for a reason, and they were foolishly trying to drag it back to the surface. But they had no choice. They couldn't walk away now. They were too deep in it, and so was Sarah, wherever she was, whatever had happened to her. They owed it to her to finish what they had started, no matter the cost. He pulled out a dusty file that was tucked at the back of the drawer. It was marked with the town's crest, faded but still visible, and the words, "Historical Records, 1840 to 1850. Eric's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the time frame he needed. This was when the pact had been made. He opened the file carefully, as if afraid it would disintegrate in his hands. Inside were brittle pages filled with spidery handwriting, the ink fading in some places but still legible. It was a letter, a correspondence between Elias Thornton, one of the town's founders, and an unnamed figure. The letter was chilling. "It is done," the letter began. "The deal is sealed. Our town shall prosper, and the price will be paid in due time. We have chosen the right sacrifices, and the balance will be maintained. We trust that you will keep your end of the bargain, as we have kept ours. The altar shall remain hidden, its power dormant, until the time is right. We trust that the generations to come will honor their commitment as we have honored ours." Eric read the words again, his eyes scanning the page as the gravity of the situation began to settle in. The sacrifices were not just random, they were deliberate, planned. And they weren't a one-time event. The pact had been meant to continue, hidden from the public eye, passed down from generation to generation. And what was even more disturbing was the mention of the altar. The place where it all began, the source of the power that had kept Grayson thriving all these years. The altar was central to the pact. And it had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The time was now. Lily leaned over Eric's shoulder, her breath catching in her throat as she read the letter with him. This isn't just about the town's prosperity. This is about something much darker. They've been feeding something monstrous, all these years. Eric's mind raced as the weight of the letter's meaning settled over him. The town had made a deal with something far beyond their understanding. The altar, the pact, it was all connected. And now, the cycle was about to begin again. The next sacrifice was coming, and it would be someone else from Grayson. But who? Sarah had been taken. Who would be next? He slammed the file shut, his heart pounding in his chest. "We have to stop it. We can't let this happen again." Lily nodded grimly, her face pale in the dim light. "But how? How can we stop something that's been going on for so long? How do we break a pact that's been buried in the town's history for centuries?" Eric swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her question press down on him. He didn't have the answers. Not yet. But they had to find a way. They couldn't let Grayson continue to live in ignorance, to continue feeding whatever darkness had taken root in the town's past. There had to be a way to break the cycle. The altar had been hidden for a reason. If they could find it, maybe they could destroy it. Maybe they could end the pact once and for all. He pushed the file back into the drawer and stood up, his mind racing. "We need to find the altar. We need to destroy it before it's too late. It's the only way." Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "But where is it? The records don't tell us where it's hidden." "They don't have to," Eric said, a thought beginning to form in his mind. "The altar has been here, in Grayson, all along. It's a part of the town's foundation. If we can find the original maps, the ones from the town's first construction, we might be able to pinpoint its location." Lily's eyes widened. "You think it's buried somewhere in the town?" "I'm certain of it," Eric replied. "The altar is the source of the power that has kept Grayson alive all these years. It's the foundation of everything, the town's wealth, its success, its very existence. It's hidden in plain sight." "But where?" Lily asked urgently. "Where would they have put it?" Eric paused, thinking hard. Then it hit him. The church. The one place that had always felt wrong. The one place that had always been there, standing watch over the town. It was the one place that had remained unchanged through the years, a constant presence in Grayson's history. "It has to be under the church," he said finally, the words leaving his mouth before he even realized it. "The altar, the pact, it's all connected to the church. We have to go there. We have to find it." Lily nodded, her face set with determination. "Then let's go. We don't have time to waste." The two of them left the archives in a hurry, the sense of urgency growing with each step they took. The town felt different now, darker, more oppressive. It was as though the shadows themselves were aware of what they were about to do, and they were pushing back, trying to keep the truth buried. But Eric and Lily knew they couldn't stop now. The town's past was alive again, and they were the only ones who could stop it. They walked quickly, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The church loomed ahead, its steeple casting a long shadow over the street. It was as if the building itself was waiting for them, beckoning them to come and uncover the final piece of the puzzle. Whatever lay beneath the church, whatever was hidden in the darkness, was the key to ending the nightmare once and for all. They had no idea what they were about to face, but there was no turning back now. The altar was waiting. And so was the darkness. The church loomed ahead like a silent sentinel, its jagged outline cutting against the dark sky. As Eric and Lily approached, the atmosphere around them seemed to shift. The air felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the very ground beneath their feet was aware of their intentions. Grayson had always been a quiet town, but tonight, it felt alive in a way that was unsettling. Every creak of the wind, every rustle of leaves, seemed amplified, echoing in the night like a whisper from the past. And the church, standing tall and unmoving, seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for them. Eric's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed open the heavy doors, the sound of the hinges groaning like a low, mournful wail. The church smelled old, musty, with a lingering scent of incense that seemed to have been burned long ago. It was dim inside, the faint light from a single candle casting dancing shadows across the walls. The stained glass windows, once vibrant with color, were now faded and cracked, their beauty stripped away by time. The air was thick with dust, as if no one had truly cared for this place in years. Lily stepped cautiously inside, her footsteps tentative as she glanced around. "It feels different in here," she murmured. "Like something's watching us." Eric didn't respond right away. He was too focused on the altar at the front of the church, the focal point of everything they had been searching for. It was just as he remembered it, tall, imposing, draped in shadows. There was an undeniable presence in this room, something far older than the stone walls and wooden pews. It felt as though the altar itself was alive, breathing in time with the pulse of the town. The markings he had seen in the basement of the church, the same symbols from the records, were etched into its surface, glowing faintly under the dim light. His breath caught in his throat as he approached the altar, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. It was almost as if the altar was responding to his touch, the hum of energy vibrating in the air around him. He shuddered, stepping back. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where it all began." Lily stood beside him, her eyes scanning the altar with a mix of awe and fear. "You think this is where the pact was made? That it's connected to everything?" Eric nodded slowly. "It has to be. The altar was used for the sacrifices. The town's prosperity, its very survival, has always depended on it. And now, it's awakening again." The silence in the church deepened, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. The air seemed to grow thicker, the weight of the past pressing down on their shoulders. Eric could feel it. Something was stirring in the shadows, something ancient and powerful, and it was growing restless. It wasn't just the town's dark past that was coming to life. It was the very force that had been feeding off Grayson for centuries, the force that had demanded blood in exchange for the town's fortune. A sudden cold breeze swept through the room, sending a shiver down Eric's spine. He looked around, his eyes darting to the windows, but there was no wind. The candle flickered violently, casting eerie, distorted shadows on the walls. For a brief moment, the air felt alive with a palpable sense of danger, as if something was moving just out of sight, watching them, waiting. "Did you feel that?" Lily's voice broke through the tension, her face pale as she looked around nervously. Eric nodded, his heart racing. "Something's here. It's like we're not alone." He turned back to the altar, his mind racing. The symbols on the stone were like a map, a guide to the truth, to the heart of Grayson's curse. They were the key to understanding the pact, to breaking the cycle. But how could they unlock its meaning? How could they destroy something that had been hidden and protected for so long? He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his fingers tracing the markings on the altar. As he touched the stone, the air around him seemed to shimmer, like the very atmosphere was shifting. For a moment, everything around him went silent. No sound, no movement, just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. Then, a voice, low and guttural, seemed to echo in the back of his mind. "You should have left," it whispered. Eric froze, his hands still resting on the altar. The voice wasn't just in his head, it was in the air, in the room itself, vibrating through the stone beneath his fingers. He jerked his hand back, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Lily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Did you hear that? Lily was standing a few feet away, her eyes wide, her hand clutching the side of one of the pews for support. I heard it. It's coming from the altar. Eric's breath caught in his throat. The altar, it wasn't just a relic. It wasn't just a piece of Grayson's past. It was alive. And it was speaking to them, warning them, maybe even trying to drive them away. He could feel the power emanating from it, dark and suffocating. The air around them grew colder, the shadows longer, as if the altar was drawing the darkness closer. The voice spoke again, louder this time, filling the space around them. You should have never come. Eric's knees nearly gave way as the pressure in the room grew unbearable. He stumbled backward, his head spinning. This wasn't just some ancient relic. This was the heart of the curse, the source of the darkness that had haunted Grayson for centuries. And now it was awake, alive, and angry. We need to get out of here, Lily said, her voice strained. She grabbed Eric's arm, pulling him toward the door. But as they turned to leave, something stopped them, a powerful, unseen force that slammed into them like a wall. They were thrown to the ground, both of them gasping for air, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Lily screamed, her voice piercing the silence. She tried to move, to stand, but the force was too strong. Eric's vision blurred, and he felt as though he were being pulled into the darkness itself. The altar, glowing with an eerie light, seemed to be pulling them toward it, its power overwhelming, suffocating them. Then, through the haze of fear and confusion, Eric heard the voice again, this time clearer, more insistent. You belong to me now. It was a command, not a question. The words reverberated in Eric's chest, vibrating through his bones. And in that moment he understood. The pact wasn't just about sacrifices. It wasn't just about the town's prosperity. The altar, the darkness, it was feeding on them, on their fear, on their very souls. Grayson had always been its home, its source of power. And now it wanted them. Lily's grip on Eric's arm tightened as the force began to release them. They gasped for air, but it didn't matter. The altar was still calling to them, its voice sinking into their minds like a poison, filling them with dread. We need to destroy it, Eric gasped, his voice barely a whisper. We need to stop it. No. Lily nodded, her eyes wide with terror but filled with determination. But how? Eric's mind raced, the answers just out of reach. They had to find a way to sever the connection, to break the pact, to destroy the altar once and for all. But how could they destroy something so ancient, something so powerful? How could they undo the horrors that had been woven into the fabric of Grayson for so long?